Today we have John Mathews, who is always and as well as intriguing. John is
and strangely alluring.
John is the Secretariat for AGWA, which is the
Alliance for Global Water Adaptation.
Yes, Alliance for Global Water Adaptation. A fellow at the bank started about 5 years. John, thanks to Atlanta. Somewhere I suspect and he was with WWF for a while, he's with CI for a while, and now he's by himself, which makes softball perfect for his colleagues. John is an old friend of mine as well. It's great to have him here. We tried to schedule him a couple of other times, and something or another went wrong every time, so we're very happy that he could come out. Sorry about this. So,
You're never going home.
Yeah. So you know. Sorry for announcing because you may not go. But it dampened the turnout, I think. But thank you very much for being here. And
great. Thanks very much. I literally may be stuck here. Can you hear me okay? Is the microphone all right? Okay, good. I literally may be stuck here for a while. I have a 5 o'clock flight tomorrow, and so I've been frantically checking my email to see if there are updates from my travel agent, and I've had like 4 offers for couch surfing so far, but I may be with you for some time. But I've been working on climate change and water issues all together since around 2003, which is sounds like kind of ancient history in the current context. And my first like non-research related work was with WWF starting in 2007 when I started up their Freshwater Climate Adaptation program globally. But I've worked in a lot of places, a couple of dozen countries. I've traveled over 1 million flight miles in that time since 2007, and worked in a lot of different contexts. And I can give you some of my primary messages really right up front. Water is absolutely critical. Water is, I like to say that there's a river that runs through our economies. That's agriculture, it's health and sanitation, it's energy, not just hydropower, it's navigation, and it's embedded in all kinds of other economic processes like manufacturing. And then you talk about ecosystems too. It's really difficult to separate water out. And the water is also exquisitely sensitive to climate shifts. And that's, there's lots of really good historic examples. I'll allude to a few of those over the course of the talk. But water is always dynamic. It's always plastic. It's not just the water that you see. It's the whole water cycle. It's water in the air. It's precipitation. It's groundwater. It's all the water that's hidden to us that often is the most sensitive and most important. And then the last part is going to be that in your own adaptation work, and I'm really proud and excited to be talking to a U.S. adaptation audience. That doesn't actually happen very often for me. You know, I strongly think that it's very difficult to do credible adaptation work anymore at an international level of operation unless you integrate some water resources management knowledge. That doesn't matter if it's an ag project or even a national health policy project. And I can provide lots of really good examples of trends that are moving towards that. So that's the presentation. John asked me to be a little provocative and brief so that we could have a larger discussion. So and I'm going to really challenge you if you really have thought about hydrating your own climate adaptation work. So this is the Hoover Dam. It's my favorite example of why climate change really matters in the context of water. Hoover Dam, most of us think of it's about 85 years old right now. It's this bathtub ring, in my mind, makes it the poster child of the importance of climate change. That is it's about 110 feet. This is around last summer, about 35 meters. That's the deficit between the climate that this dam was designed for and the climate that it lives in now. And it will probably run dry in another 20 to 35 years at most. And that's after they've spent $1.5 billion in the past 5 years to be able to put in what they call the bathtub drain, which is an additional way to suck out the last dregs of water before that reservoir is no longer a reservoir. So that's why is the Hoover Dam a global development example? Because before the Hoover Dam was in the southwestern U.S., before all 40 million people were there were a few 100,000 people and some hunter-gatherers. And the difference between East Africa and the southwestern U.S. is the Hoover Dam. That this is energy, it's water supply, it's sanitation, it's irrigation, it is flood control. That dam drove at least 20 million worth of people to move into that region, and it is going away. What does that region look like without the Hoover Dam? At the same time, this is just upstream of a USAID-funded small hydropower project, the Koshi Basin in Nepal, that I visited when I was still at WWF, actually. And it's a very small hydropower dam. At the time I was there, it was about 3 years old, about 15 kilowatts, 20 kilowatts. So quite modest. This is supposed to be a spillway in which the most of the water, about 80% of the water, should be coming over. There's no water that's coming over it. And why is that? It's because this is a new dam that was built using our methods, our best practices, to give a country that its capital had 18 hours of rolling blackouts every day, to give them the very basic energy resources that they needed. And they're diverting all the water. Below this dam is 6 kilometers of dead river. And what's below that? Another dam that they're building. And what's below that? Another dam that also is half dry. So this is a failed investment 5 years after it was built, purely because of climate change. So that's the development challenge. It's not the Hoover Dam in 85 years. It's the Koshi Basin right now. So there's a great climate adaptation economist here in DC at the World Bank, Stefan Hallegatt. Many investment decisions have long-term consequences. Infrastructure in particular can shape development for decades or centuries. This is going to last for many more decades, probably several more centuries. Who knows about this one? A duration that often extends beyond infrastructure's lifetime because the economic system reorganizes itself around them. And we could add ecosystems to that sentence too. This is a quote by a fantastic economist. She's now the head of the Water Resources Group at the World Bank, Claudia Sadoff, with a South African co-author and engineer. Water is the primary medium through which climate change will impact people, ecosystems, and economies. Water resources management should therefore be an early focus for adaptation to climate change. She wrote that in 2007. And it's still absolutely relevant and true and not well understood. And again, what does water look like? It looks like agriculture. It looks like water storage. It's the largest water user in the U.S. is thermal energy. Same thing for France. In our case, it's coal-fired power. In their case, it's nuclear. It's all of the basic development standards that we're talking about. So it's an urgent need. It's a development challenge. But how big is it? So sounds like the start of a really bad joke. This came out in late November from a U.S. agency. I can't remember which one. The U.S. Energy Information Administration, and they listed how much new hydropower is going to be placed in the Mekong through 2020. So Vietnam has more than 200 new dams that will be in place actually by 2017. Vietnam is not a large country. That's 200 dams. There's a paper that came out in Science as a policy forum piece 2 weeks ago. There are more than 450 hydropower dams alone that are planned for the Mekong, the Amazon, and Congo. 3 rivers. 3 rivers. Africa is in one dam in the DRC overnight. When they finally flip on the switch for hydropower, will double its hydropower generation potential overnight. And that still is at a level of about 8% of its potential hydropower that it could implement over the next few years. So the pace of development is making thoughtful, careful development challenging in places where climate change and other environmental issues are shifting things very, very rapidly. So, and how is it that we really do adaptation? In most cases, it's a boutique approach. It's not a systematic institutional level change. And that's, we talk about amplifying. How do we get from isolated cases, little pilots, to something that's really big and really transformative that matches the scale of the change that we're actually seeing? So, and what are those climate challenges? This is a slide that I made for Paris. And I really wanted to use it. I also have an inordinate fondness for monster movies. So this is most of how we identify climate challenges is actually what I call the Godzilla model. It's an image that Godzilla kind of shows up, wrecks Tokyo in some extreme event, and then you rebuild. And it's a very specific type of model of resilience that you have to use to respond to that. You go back and you rebuild Tokyo. So this is really, it's a disaster model. Super drought, super floods, might throw in the odd tropical cyclone. But if we're talking about long-lived things, infrastructure and ecosystems, then mostly we're talking about the blob. So the blob, I forced my 6-year-old son to watch this with me just for study purposes, of course, recently. And it's about at his level. At 7, he will have outgrown the blob, but I still like it. This is steady creeping climate change. It's it's what you sometimes see the literature vaguely referred to as transformation, and it's when things become profoundly unfamiliar. You're not just talking about about Godzilla that's wrecking everything all at once. It's when you see that slow divergence. That's what we see in the Hoover Dam. That's what we saw realized almost immediately in the Koshi Basin. This is what Thomas Friedman has called very nicely climate weirding. And the blob, we have very few approaches to be able to deal with blob level climate change. And that is mostly tracking change. It's not the rubber band approach to resilience where you stretch things out and let it snap back. How would you characterize climate adaptation in general? Usually we have, if I have an inordinate fondness for really bad monster movies, I think in general climate adaptation, I'd say especially in the US, has an inordinate fondness for climate models. And I think much of that is really driven by this faith that climate models, that the climate scientists are out there to help us, that they actually know something about sustainable development. They know something about water resources management or urban management. And it turns out they don't really. Downscaling was not developed actually for adaptation purposes. It's inadequate for almost any application in which you need both accuracy and confidence, and especially if you need a high quality quantitative framework. That is infrastructure. You need to tell an engineer that the dam needs to be this high or 2 meters higher. So as a result, in recent years, engineers have identified this as an existential crisis. I'm not an engineer. I'm an aquatic ecologist. But I could play an engineer on TV, at least in a commercial spot. The engineers have been working very, very extensively on this particular issue. And starting around 2007, 2008, they started to develop some really interesting solutions. But this idea of top-down, where you take the GCM and then you try to force it to define what your climate adaptation problem is, it doesn't work in most cases. At best, it gives you very, very general guidance, and it's often very difficult to communicate to strategic decision makers. GCMs, I don't ignore all that little text. That little text is not important. What this is a comparison of essentially climate variability, looking at different measures of estimating how climate variability is going to be changing in the future. This is what happened, this little red dot. That's history, that's observed data. All of this is generated with stochastically. So it uses a kind of simple model and says, kind of resamples the data and says, this is kind of randomly what you might expect around that mean point. And I know it's really hard to see in this room. You might see like a bunch of little black triangles here. That's the GCM data. So at this end, we're not experiencing much climate change. This end, we're experiencing a lot of climate change, the big dramatic stuff. The GCMs in most parts of the world don't even describe the extreme weather that we're having, and they certainly don't do the transformation. They don't do the blob adaptation. So they're sampling. They're being very conservative about climate change, and in fact, this is the stuff that we need to be worrying about. It doesn't even overlap with what the GCMs are doing, and this is what you see in 70-80% of the planet right now. So there's a lot of talk about using bottom-up methodologies, and it is unfortunately it is in some danger of becoming a kind of truism. I'm talking about it from a very specific audience perspective. I'm thinking about it from an infrastructure and a long-term natural resource management perspective. And you can find out a lot more at the site. So the method that I'm talking about was developed with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and University of Massachusetts Amherst around 2008 in the long-term management of Lake Superior. So it's a huge mess of infrastructure, a very complicated set of transboundary stakeholders, lots of different issues that they had to balance. And the interesting thing about this is the engineer said, you know what we need to do? We need to not start with the climate models, we need to start with the stakeholders. We need to let them define performance markers that we can translate their definitions of success and failure into a framework that we can use to evaluate what we're doing. We'll assemble lots of different data modalities. So using all of the data in that last slide, the often weak GCM data, stochastic data, maybe observed data, we can even generate up like wholly different approaches that we haven't thought of before. And we use that to essentially do hypothesis testing, and we can really define the limits of what we might be working with. And this has proven to be a very successful approach, at least for infrastructure. So, and very, very interesting. It started to catch on very widely. Agwa's have been developing a large program around that. It's nice. What can you do with it? You can focus on the likelihood of impacts, how robust the system is as a whole, as well as different operational frameworks. You can use climate and non-climatic factors. There's no assumptions on the time of impact. Just selectively cherry-picking a single GCM, you can use all the GCMs if you want, all the scenarios. So it really challenges the way that we have been doing things, and it reports directly back to the stakeholders to get their feedback. It's called decision scaling, which I think puts the appropriate emphasis back on the decision-making process. So the other really big insight that I feel like has been developed over the last 10 years has come from the Netherlands, also came about the same time, around 2007, 2008. And it's the idea that most of us, I think, who are working in adaptation intuitively realize that we need to be thinking not about just one particular decision trajectory, we need to think about multiple trajectories. How is it that you manage to stay flexible? Can you turn flexibility itself into a kind of consistent outcome? This methodology is called Adaptation Pathways. It was developed by a brilliant woman with the Water and Environment Ministry. She's now with a group called Deltatus, Marjolein Haasnoot, but it looks like Haasnoot. She's great. She has some nice videos on this. And effectively, you think about different potential scenarios and different coping mechanisms. She literally calls this the metro map. And the idea there is that you are navigating into the future across particular decision points, and that there are nodal points in which you need to be able to reevaluate where you are, where you need to make transitions. And you can apply all kinds of environmental, structural, external economic filters into those decision points. So I represent a group called AGWA. As John mentioned, AGWA was founded in 2010. I started off with a stray call from a Danish friend said, I want you to meet a friend of mine at the World Bank. I think your Rolodex matches his Rolodex. You should organize something together on climate and water, because you both seem very operationally focused and you have different but complementary perspectives. So we invited about 30 people. About 45 or 50 people showed up. The 6-hour meeting became an 8-hour meeting. At the end of it, we said, we think we have a group here. We have an organization. It's now about 800 people in it. It's co-chaired by a Swedish water think tank, SIWI, and the Water Partnership Program at the World Bank. We have steering committee members that include Deltatus, a group I've already mentioned, based in the Netherlands, the Institute of Water Resources at the Corps of Engineers, Seattle Public Utilities, the World Business Council of Sustainable Development. Our main focus is how that we mainstream the emerging insights that have been occurring in different disciplines, in different regions, and different kinds of institutions into a coherent, decision support-oriented framework for specific types of audiences. I'll talk about some of those different audiences. We also have a small policy group. And we seem to be rapidly growing right now. So I sit in the middle of the Secretariat and in a lot of airplanes. Who is our primary audience? It falls into two groups: technical water professionals that are really seeking to integrate climate change into their work. We actually call that person Luis's engineer. That came out of one of our very early workshops. And policymakers who are really trying to create the enabling environment in which to develop more coherent, holistic approaches. Luis's engineer. This is an idea that it's a meme, I guess, that we developed that we still use very much inside of AGWA. Someone who knows that they are making unrobust, unresilient decisions every day, and they don't have the institutional context and support in which to make better ones. Those are the people that want to do better, and they know they are screwing up. How do you help that guy? So that's who we tend to focus on. That's most of the 800 people that are inside of AGWA. A quick survey of some of the kinds of institutions that are represented. NGOs are well represented. The UN is represented. Lots of donor institutions, mostly multilaterals, but not just. Some foundations. Private sector, surprisingly well represented. We ran a workshop at Chevron, for instance, fairly recently, and I'll talk some about our finance work in a bit. Academics, lots of think tanks, not many students. And these are some of the parts of the water community that are involved. Sanitation, energy, utilities, resource management, conceived very broadly. A lot of policy people. Finance is growing very, very rapidly right now. Ag, and then people that work, that they label themselves generally climate and or adaptation. And regions. Actually, North America is underrepresented. Many of our North American representatives are in Mexico. We have a very strong set of connections in Europe, Africa, South America. These are all the African regions here. Asia, but interestingly, many reflecting the idea that many of us serve as nodal points inside of our organizations. Many of us work globally. We work in lots of countries and lots of places. We span continents. For some reason, Australians don't answer surveys. So, what is it that unifies AGWA? We call them guiding elements, mostly because some of the people on our steering committee think that the word principle is very prescriptive. We define some of what these guiding elements are here. You can find that on our website. But they inform all of our work, even our policy-related work. We had a very strong representation in Paris, for instance. I'm going to be talking about these programs coming up. These guiding elements are that we use bottom-up approaches to assessing vulnerability, specifically in a quantitative framework. Sustainability has to encompass both engineered, kind of hardwired management systems, as well as dynamic ecosystems. That we need to make sure that economic, and I would also add finance approaches, reinforce the ability to maintain flexibility, because often those tend to minimize or dampen our options for flexibility. That they help us ultimately resolve the residual uncertainty that we can't do through the assessment process. And that flexible governance is absolutely critical as we continue on. So that's really the Adaptation Pathways segment there. This is a book that just came out last August. It's called Confronting Climate Uncertainty in Water Resources Planning and Project Design, the Decision Tree Framework. It's a free download. Here's the address. It's by Patrick Ray and Casey Brown, both at UMass. But it really reflects a huge amount of thinking from the AGWA network. What is it? It guides development bank loan officers in how they think, what are they investing in? They're mostly investing in long-lived infrastructure across all the different water-related sectors that I've talked about. And it gives them a stepwise method that they don't even have to think, am I doing climate adaptation or not? It automatically matches their existing institutional context and then finds the right tools for them to be able to use decision scaling in a way that can identify risk. It's being used in a lot of projects. This is literally what it looks like. There's a $300 million water treatment plant in Mombasa. Mexico City has, I think, 3 decision scaling projects. We have some in Malawi, a bunch of hydropower in Nepal. It's being very rapidly scaled up. But how do we think about ecosystems within those managed networks? This is another piece of work that published this month in Nature Climate Change. It's called Eco-Engineering Decision Scaling. And this is Guillermo Mendoza, who I hoped would be here, but he's working on a project out in California right now. He's with the Army Corps of Engineers and looking very suave there. So holding a nice cognac, I think. This is a great website that we developed to accompany the Nature Climate Change piece. It developed about 35,000 hits in the first 4 weeks that we launched it from about 90 countries. There's a lot of interest about how you systematically bring in ecosystems into managed water networks. So you can download a copy for free from our website if you don't have access to journals. So please enjoy this. Then this is a big project that is really reaching its fruition, and it's about how we engage water managers in the developing world, and we're taking advantage of something that's very unusual. I would say that it's an interesting opportunity. That if you look at the water management planning and design cycle, there's a relatively fixed process that you find globally. It became stereotyped, really, sometime in the early 20th century. It has not changed very much. So you find that the Corps of Engineers manages these types of projects more or less the way that Vietnam does, and Colombia also follows the same pattern. It might be 8 steps here, it might be 5 steps here, but it's actually all the same steps. So given that much of water management decision making, the strategic decision making, occurs in basically the same way, are there elements in that decision making process where we can identify generically that are the key aspects in which you can include climate adaptation and also include climate dynamic ecosystem management? So that's a project that we call CRIDA, which is a horrible acronym. It means Climate Risk Informed Decision Analysis. Here's the website for the kind of startup screen, and it focuses on 3 basic questions. How do we diagnose quantitative risk with stakeholders? How do we define long-term decision making, given ongoing uncertainty, things that haven't been resolved through the risk assessment process? And how do we integrate ecological infrastructure and infrastructure risk simultaneously? This is decision scaling. This is EADS, and this is Adaptation Pathways. And I wouldn't say this is a recipe book. I would call it a cooking textbook. You could then write for your institution a recipe book. So this is it's co-led inside of AGWA by the Corps of Engineers and the Dutch Water and Environment Ministry, but we're talking about a very large a training capacity building program. We're working with 3 universities on that so far. I hope to develop a lot of media. We also are going to launch a global community of practice on this. We hope to also go multilingual if we can get the funding for that. Oh, sorry that this didn't work out. This is looking at climate bond standards. So as a scientist, I was incredibly ignorant about what bonds were. I was always very nervous about finance. I was worried about my own finances mostly, and then I got approached inside of AGWA just about a year and a half ago by 4 NGOs, the Climate Bonds Initiative, Ceres in Boston, World Resources Institute, CDP in London, that they said, the green bonds market is huge. When they approached me in 2013, it was about $13 billion a year. 2014, it hit about 25. Last year, it just crested 40 billion globally. What do these green bonds go for? They go for big infrastructure projects. DC Water, just over a year ago, did a $330 million green bond project that was for a bunch of climate-related issues. It was for flood control in a couple of DC neighborhoods. It was for riparian restoration. It was for engaging with Chesapeake Bay, and a couple of other issues too that were. Oh, that's right. It was separating out the stormwater from the sanitary sewer system. $330 million, sold the whole green bond in about 45 minutes. So this is rapidly growing. China and India have just glommed onto green bonds. Hong Kong wants to be the next green bonds hub globally. So many of these, because of the cross-cutting nature of water, are water-related bonds. So this group of 4 NGOs said, AGWA, can you help us put together a standard that includes climate adaptation and climate mitigation, scoring as a way to evaluate how green these bonds really are for investor knowledge, but maybe is also guiding the way that the issuing agencies themselves will push this forward. There's a lot more that I could talk about. I'm going to skim it a bit. This is just the kind of recent growth in bonds. They're expecting that it'll probably hit 50 or 60 billion next year. And we very much used a kind of decision tree format. This is a kind of macro level view of it. But if you go to agwaguide.org/green bonds, then you can actually see the whole standard. We finished the public consultation process in about the next week. And this has gotten buy-in from Bloomberg, Dow Jones, Goldman, JP Morgan, a bunch of European big commercial banks. We've talked to British Columbia about their $7 billion Canadian hydropower green bonds. I mean, this is catching on very, very rapidly. We expect to have the first certification on this by this summer. It'd be with a U.S. utility. So I'd like to just end. That's a very quick tour. I was working on lots of other things. I didn't even talk about the Climate is Water initiative that we ran in the lead up to Paris, and now we're working with the French. We're working with the Moroccans now in the lead up to Marrakesh. AGWAguide.org is where most of our operational material is. AllianceForWater.org is where you can learn more in general about AGWA and where more of our policy work is. So thank you. Questions?
Thank you, John. That was great. And this will all go on in audio of John and slide. Question?
That's a really good question. Are there how often at a kind of a high level on a PowerPoint slide, you see these divisions between agriculture and cities and healthcare and energy, and do those differences really play out? Maybe on a personal level. Is that what you mean? Like in terms of like within agua activities? It's so in the practice of actually working through potentially competing groups, different kinds of water users. You certainly could add ecosystems and resource managers in there as other potential competing users. I think you can get a lot of people to a level of knowledge where they say, yeah, I guess I kind of buy that, because I'm a coal-fired power plant operator, I'm also a water manager. But that's a kind of a superficial understanding. And it often is actually in the dialogue, almost confrontation that occurs with very different kinds of stakeholders in which you start to see something more interesting happen. When you realize that when you talk about an extremely hot day and how that might alter the water decisions that coal-fired power plant operator might be making, and how it's going to affect the farmers that are downstream, and possibly the farmers that are upstream, and what that also might mean for the city that's nearby, and how you really start to think about those trade-offs. I mean, I think decision scaling ultimately is a trade-off mechanism. It's a quantitative trade-off mechanism, and in that process, you see a real education that's occurring. Guillermo, the guy who was relaxing with the cognac, he has one of his projects in Udon Thani in northern Thailand, and there, it's a relatively discrete community scale project, but it's still complicated. You have the urban footprint, the water utility. You have a bunch of rice irrigation farmers, and then upstream you have some hydropower. The decisions that those hydropower operators make about if they're going to generate energy or they're going to save it for the dry season, it's exactly when the farmers need it. It's exactly when the households need it. That's when stuff hits the fan. And people have to really make much more informed and hopefully holistic decisions. Yes, here.
Would you mind clarifying the question?
Yeah, thanks for the reminder. Appreciate it. All right, Sean.
I have two questions. Sean Martin from WWF. One, and two, you referred several times to integrating ecological process. I wonder if you describe what that looks like or outcomes or ways of it. Yeah, that's it more complicated. Easier for
that's also two really good questions. So first you asked who is Luis and Luis's engineer. It's a good story, and then also what does it look like when you begin to incorporate ecosystems into this trade-off process, and how do people respond to it? So the question about who is Luis? Luis Garcia is a very well-known Guatemalan water resources engineer. He's known all across Latin America, and I think he's in his mid-60s right now. But he's been working in this space for about 40 years. He worked for the Inter-American Development Bank. Now he's with the World Bank, and he's the guy that he literally stood up in one of our very first decision support oriented meetings, and he basically said what was in that box about Luis's engineer. He said, "This is the guy that I worry about. That's the guy that he's stuck in his institution. He knows he's making bad decisions, and he wants to do something better." And that's actually it's sometimes it's easy, especially if you're involved in conservation or you're a natural resource manager, to kind of want to demonize engineers. And I actually professionally did that for some time. And what I have come to know is that the average engineer that I meet is actually 28 and a young woman. And she's really passionate about how you think about sustainability. She's a civil engineer, or she's a water resources management engineer. So Luis's engineer is not a passive person. Luis's engineer is an active person. He's been trying to figure this out on his or her own for some time. And your other question about what does it look like when we're trying to identify ecosystems as a stakeholder and a multi-stakeholder process. Who speaks for the ecosystems in a way? How do you define ecological resilience in that kind of a context? And that's something that we talked a great deal about through the National Science Foundation process that led up to the Nature Climate Change paper, and that we still talk about very actively inside of AGWA, particularly in the context of the CRIDA work. So I give a couple quick answers, and I'd love to follow up. So in a place like the U.S., where you have a lot of data, and you have kind of an institutional place, a chair that's at the table for ecosystems, it's pretty easy. I know I live in Oregon. It's the Greater Columbia system. So when we talk about ecosystems and water, we mean salmon. That's what we talk about. We talk about salmon. We can draw a little picture of a salmon there, and we know a lot about salmon, and we know how they work. We talk about the Congo. There are riffles that are larger than this room that they are so strong that they have their own species that have not left that riffle for several thousand years, and they are a separate species. We have no idea what lives in the Congo. We can't use a species-specific model. And we certainly don't know enough about those species to be able to say how it's going to be able to respond to climate change in the future. We need to back up to a different level of analysis. And what we feel pretty confident about is that if we're thinking about how ecosystems themselves are able to respond in a dynamic way to climate change, that we need to think about the natural enabling systems that they have had in the past to help them make their own intrinsic adjustments. So we think about habitat complexity, we think about connectivity, we think about the disturbance regime, which in the context of water systems is the flow regime or the hydro period. And all of those are quantitative approaches. They are things that we can put very easily into a water resources management framework, into an engineering model. We work really well inside of a decision scaling framework. So those are the kind of core things. Many of them we can derive with a fairly high level of confidence through even remotely sourced data. We don't even have to have like a really strong kind of historic record to be able to do the work. So that's where we have a number of pilots, like the USGS has been very interested. They just submitted a proposal for doing some work in the Great Basin using an EADS application there. I think yesterday, yeah, that's when they submitted it. So, the other applications that we're doing too. The other thing is we took some, at least in many of the people in my world, we like to talk about natural infrastructure too, and I think that's a different framework than talking about ecosystem services. EADS is interesting that you can also apply it if you're treating the ecosystem as a piece of infrastructure. Then you can think about it as a green piece of infrastructure, as a gray or a hybrid piece of infrastructure, and you can essentially do the kinds of comparative cost analysis, performance analysis, robustness analysis that you could do on any piece of infrastructure. So that's one of the areas that we hope to be able to take it next.
That's what it is. Supposed to say sign. So I have so back there. Sign. Yeah, you can pass it around. Got here without having received like the other one. definitely sign up. That's how we.
So listening to you, but I'm reminded a little bit of that focus on a highly are trying to build understanding of the national policy process. And I had put up harness private sector or I found myself thinking about the perspective for knowledge. But also I see in our governance case that you what calls itself formal network. So I'm really interested in how do you manage results?
Yeah.
How do you engage funders or students?
It is this is a huge amount of my headspace goes to answering that particular question. We've had repeatedly lots of discussions about how we should structure AGWA, and we've become a more and more formal institution. We have a steering committee. We have a lot of subsidiary bodies and specific teams. We have budgets. But we're not a legal entity. We even get our own invitations to UN meetings. It's yeah, they're all in the Caymans. I hope. So they seem to have like a pretty high, robust coastline. So I feel good about that. But it's complicated. We usually have to have it on a kind of case by case study. We usually need one or two institutions to basically say we're the lead for this. Yeah, well, like for the green bonds work, none of them are on the steering committee. But the work that funded the Climate is Water initiative, that was a huge British engineering firm, worth about 1.5, 2 billion pounds a year. So, that it's really it varies a lot, and it is complicated. And we've talked about becoming a really formal institution. And in general, with some kinds of partners, some kinds of public partners, some kinds of bilateral and multilateral partners, it's harder to work with us actually if we become an NGO. And so sometimes, like over cocktails, I'll kind of gloss over it and say we're an NGO, but technically we're, as you said, an informal network. But we're a network that does stuff and that is definitely self-identifies. I met with what's the foreign minister, Ségolène Royal, with one of her senior associates on her policy team, and it was so funny. This is in a meeting in the run up to the COP, and he said, "I am part of AGWA." And that I get that kind of reaction all the time. It's a really pleasing reaction. So I think that it's, as you said, it's a natural community practice. I think there's something that all of you as adaptation people, that you naturally feel kind of like a self-identity, towards other people that are working in adaptation. It is hard work. It is really challenging. Your cup is always half full, and you need other people. You often have to get credibility from external sources in order to be able to work in your institution. And certainly for the first few years that I worked in adaptation, everybody was pretty low in the totem pole, and they had to argue up about changing priorities from a real position to weakness, and you add like the water layer onto that too. You talk about people that need some real therapy. Yes, in the back, sir. So the question was, are there going to be innovative approaches maybe to supplying water that maybe mobilize depleting resources such as frozen water resources? You can imagine Greenland too is a good example of that, or some of the Antarctic shelf ice. To expand your example, I've heard some crazy ideas that I thought they were really crazy. I kept my mouth shut, but there were very serious people in the room that treated them very, very seriously. That, as an example, Suriname in South America has a huge amount of water and very few people, and they have a lot of cloud forests. They have very wet, spectacularly wet tropical forests there, and they have very seriously fielded the idea that maybe they could fill huge floating bags and float them over to Haiti, after the next hurricane. You can imagine a whole bunch of the Caribbean, might potentially be a market for it, and they've worked up business plans. I suspect that there's going to be to me that sounds very difficult to implement and manage, but I think we're going to see some much more intensive thinking about what today sound like extreme responses.
Thanks. Again, there are some provocative stuff. Appreciate it. I wanted to pick up on your slide about climate projections and downscaling. That whole thing. I think there is a lot of criticism in climate change community and climate change of climate science and how well suited the way it's set up now is to decision making. So I'm very sympathetic to that kind of argument discussion. I'm having a hard time, and I need to drill down, I know, into some of the resources that you provided here and that you had to obviously. Can you give us an example of, where, traditional climate science, GCM models and downscale climate projections kind of breaks down and doesn't lead to good decisions, and where an alternative you're describing might lead to better decisions. And the reason I'm saying that is that the conventional wisdom is that in the longer term, downscaled modeling does tend to be correct short term. Argue that also, but certainly when you look at the development program scale, which is usually now 5 years, it's useless. You're not going to get projection. But if you are looking out 30 or 50 or 100 years, and a lot of the large scale infrastructure that one might be looking at, or sector might be time scales, one would think on the face of it that kind of downscaling should be decision.
I think there was a period, certainly in the engineering community, where so the question is really how is it that am I being too provocative with GCMs? Are they maybe more useful for a long-term solution? So I'd say there's two issues with GCMs. One is I don't think that they really tell us what we think they tell us. I think that even over long time scales, that we are seeing such rapid and really fundamental transformations in the way the whole climate system itself functions, that climate models are actually they will become less useful over time. And the weakest part has always been, even over short time scales, has been with precipitation. You normally have like a 70 or 80% range of variation across a bunch of scenarios that just for one particular locale, and that's at the scale of, let's say, Maryland. Even the IPCC said in their 2008 report, their technical report on water and climate, that the most useful scale for GCMs for water resources management was roughly the size of the Mississippi Basin. So, and there's been a lot of talk about new scenarios and rejiggering GCMs. You know, I don't think there's that much that's really been changing under the hood. And if you look in worse, you look at the way that they're normally implemented. People will pick a handful of models, and then they'll pick one or two scenarios, which is absolute worst practices. You should never do that. That is dishonest. That is cherry picking, and it is ruling out the full range of possibilities. And when you look at that range of possibilities, you become very dissatisfied with GCMs. So the first issue is they don't really tell us what we think that they. I think what they do, what we think that they do. The second part is they're often not worrying about the things that we worry about. So we're letting them define our problems for us. So, and that's where you know, who is it that really knows about the system? No, it's the people that that live and work and make decisions in that system. We should work with them to build a system level model, and then we should work with them to define what success and failure is, and then we can place climate information of many different flavors within their defined boxes. So GCMs in that context, I would say they can help us make better decisions, but we shouldn't have too much faith in them. And there is a remarkable amount of faith. The worst example that I know of is from Japan, and it was I was at a meeting a few years ago from the highest level person working in climate adaptation with the Japanese government. He's extremely smart. He's extremely powerful, and he showed on a presentation. He started with the GCMs, and he said, and this goes into the hydrologic models, and then this goes into the water management models, and this goes into the econometric models, and then this goes into the ecological models, and this goes into the political socioeconomic systems. It was so many layers of models that he was building up. He literally said that the greatest obstacle to effective climate adaptation is computational capacity. And this is from Japan, which has, arguably, more computational capacity per capita than any other country in the world. Like that's the problem he's identified. So I think he just took what most of us have been doing to its logical extreme. And that's really dangerous. That is faith. That is faith that is ungrounded.
I just want to second what you're saying. GCMs were originally developed for extent on time scales to answer the question: mitigate?
Yeah.
Does all this carbon matter or not? Now we're using it for lots of focused decision making. And the other thing that I like about the decision scaling, and I've done that because it's great because look at where something you're looking at is failed and ask, plausible are those conditions to that cause failure? You also ask, well, what else is going to, the thing we were working on still matter? So we did some work for the Washington water supply be salinated by water would have to get above. That would be bad. But then the city it certainly would be underwater, so who cares? So you don't have to invest in protecting the intake because you don't need the intake. So you can sort of start taking things off. Only apply. Should and you've got that plausibility. So great.
Okay, great. All right. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. One coming in at ground level and one coming in at 2,000 feet. So the ground level one, I'm from the Mountain Institute. I actually wear two hats. I'm the executive director of the Institute, but I'm also chair of the steering committee partnership, which is about 50 governments, about 200 NGOs, research institutions, and so on. Sounds really grand, fairly token and individual. And I have grand hopes to change that in the coming years. I just became chair, and so But so starting at the ground level, we work a lot in watersheds and stuff. And one of the challenges we see, and this is where I'm trying to put all this together, is we can have great stakeholder engagement in many of the stakeholders, have good science and so on. But often there's a real problem, which is actually how you mentioned rice. But you can get all those other pieces in place, but what's notable, Peru, 75% of social conflicts actually have water.
Yeah.
And until those lower level engagement, community empowerment, how engages, it's sort of a big issue that's sort of the elephant in the room or something.
Right.
From our perspective, working with local communities. So how can you help that process? That's one question.
Mm.
And then the second one is sort of the overlap. I mean, mountains, water towers, they're critically important because half the world's water passes through mountain systems. There's tremendous problems with degraded habitats, et cetera. I would say on paper, there's huge needs and a very important role for mountain management. We had a huge struggle to even get the word mountain into the SDGs. In the mountain agenda, in the water SDGs and targets, it was touch and go whether mountains were figure. I look at Stockholm Water Week. Excuse me, I'll stop frothing in a second. But if you look at Stockholm Water Week, you'll see a couple of talks on mountain sources. Now here's this major gem of real things. And mountains are at the table. So I'm trying to explore ways that our sector can work with really compelling, powerful, recognized work that's going on with water. So two questions. How can you help us and on the people?
So the two questions as I understand, the first one is how is it when you have weak governance that you actually have effective conflict resolution around climate adaptation issues? Is that right?
It's that, and how can local rice farm? It relates to the informal government that feed it. How can that be made?
Yeah, so that an excellent question, and then the second one is really like the kind of silence. Yeah. So that I'll answer the second one first because that one's I think potentially easier. For World Water Week, I mean Siwi was one of the co-chairs for Agua, runs World Water Week, and Mats Eriksson is the head of the adaptation program, and his wife is Nepali. I mean, he's lived in Nepal for a long time. If you walk into his office, he has this massive poster of Everest. This guy is passionate about mountains. So and especially about their role in water. I would reach out to him very directly, and I think that is a group that will continue to mobilize and build momentum. So it sounds like you're trying to enable that almost kind of level of awareness and activation to become more aligned. So that's right. Good for you. So the first part about resolving conflict and making communities effective when maybe there are formal and informal governance mechanisms that aren't very functional. That's something that we've started to explore actually inside of Agua. For instance, this proposal I alluded to earlier with the USGS, one of the people that's on the proposal is a man named Aaron Wolf. Aaron Wolf is the global expert on water conflict. When the BBC or the Economist needs a quote about water conflict on ISIS or India, they go to Aaron. and they get a quote from this particular project is sort of in his backyard. He's more used to working with state or the World Bank, or Israel, but he's in Oregon, and the Great Basin is literally over a mountain, and we have ample examples right now in the Great Basin of a very active water conflict. The issues at Malheur right now. That's about who owns the water, who owns the livestock grazing rights. What is that? That's about how you grow grass. They're at a major wetland. So he's one of the co-PIs on that particular proposal. We really want to this idea of weak governance. We know that it'll work in Western Europe, but does it work in Rwanda? Does it work in Myanmar? We want to make sure that it functions. And part of that, our initial insight is that you need to really thoroughly look at the decision-making processes, both, as you pointed out, formal and informal, and the way that stuff really happens. And often in much of the world, you have very traditional conflict resolution or water management systems that are going on. And what happens when they break down? You can imagine in a country like Bhutan, they have 600 varieties of rice in Bhutan that they grow. So you have all kinds of, with just rice growing, all kinds of weird elevational issues and precipitation changes that are occurring. At the same time that the country itself, its society is shifting quite rapidly too. So you kind of have to, that's something like a blob issue. You have to be able to track all those changes at the same time, and as much as possible, probably reinforce the existing informal, traditional networks as much as you can. But it's not easy. Nepal has gone from like 3 crops over the last 20 years in most places with precipitation-fed agriculture to 2 crops in most places, and all that stuff's on the hillside. So they have to start thinking about what does irrigation look like? How does that fit into their decision-making system? Do they divide up the land that's down at the bottom of the valleys? Do they start reusing the groundwater systems in different ways on the hillsides? It's not easy. We call it transformation because it is big change. Yeah.
Favor the GCM discussion. To what extent does bias correction absorb salt? Second, it started seeing
So, 2 very, very strong questions. So, are there ways that we can make GCMs better? Can we put a saddle on that horse? And then the other one, where are we doing EEDS? So, I'm going to again answer the second question first. The paper just published. So we have pilots that are right now being developed, and so we're really actively looking for more. So we feel that it has exciting potential. What I would say, the one example of that is the World Bank is very interested. Given that they already use that decision tree text that they launched last August, this week I went to them and I said, what if we add, we slide into the work you're already starting to pilot globally? We add in an ecosystem component. It's just a small adjustment from what you're already doing. It's easy to integrate, and it already meets your existing safeguards and control mechanisms. They responded very positively to that. So I think with groups that have strong safeguards like the World Bank, that are interested in either applying decision scaling in the future or that they already are, I think it's an easy sell. So in terms of things like bias correction, there's also dynamic downscaling. There's a lot of different methodologies that have been developed over the past decade or so to try and improve the quality of the output. I guess I'm still very skeptical. I think ultimately GCMs are backward-looking models. That's how we ground them, and that's even what you're referring to is we try to ground them in stuff that's already happened, and I think that's why they're not that good about being able to predict things in the future. And again, they do air temperature okay. It's not great, but it's pretty good. And they do it, maybe at like a seasonal scale. But water, it just has never worked. It's never worked in GCMs. It's too complicated to cycle. Even a lot of the other kinds of models that people develop, like, all due respect, things like INVEST, like they don't really have like hydrological climate models that are built into them, and it's really it's very frustrating, So I think we can saddle the horse. I'm not sure if we can really ride it.
Just to turn we're always for active, and we're trying models into what they're about is showing uncertainty. We have 30 models and show you use that as bounds to in this way or that way, and it's just a tool to vision different ways that climate. Rather, this is where it's going. Like, this is possible. It happen. So actually,
I think that's an appropriate use of them, and I think the other part of uncertainty, the opposite of uncertainty, is confidence. And what I like about decision scaling is that it accrues confidence, and it does it in a social context, and that's how you fight uncertainty, is you accrue confidence. Yes, sir.
I feel like I'm out of my element. My name is Anthony Siriani, and I represent colleague Rafferty PSDR Industries. I'm recently returned from Vietnam, 2 weeks humping language, the shrimp farms through the rice fields with the Prime Minister himself. I've seen the disaster. Has continued to build dams in the Mekong River for allowing salt water to penetrate to miles and miles inland that are absolutely destroying the rice fields. That's the first reaction. Second reaction, salinity is too high for even the shrimp farmers who have no idea how to react. So first I'd like to say thank you. I'm so happy for you all this. I didn't know. I feel like I'm that I wish I had been in years ago, and I'll tell you my question is my interest. So I can't predict climate. I can't predict water temperature. See, there are people that are going to do that for me. What I can do, and you should have the Hoover Dam, as the water levels come down, the aquatic life is in much closer danger to entrainment into the intake, Hoover Dam itself, or the freshwater intakes that are sitting along those waterways. So go back to the Mekong, what we see is this enormous destruction of food source. Source that they're destroying is the only source that supplies 70% of the protein to a good portion of Vietnam from using intakes from or bicycle pumps or submersible, whatever the protection is. Fish are pulled up sushi.
And not very good sushi.
No, no. And then in our product, on the other side of the coin, I was asked CDC. My background goes way back to swimming, frolics, and stopping children from being trained, interested, entrapped on drains, and interested in this whole process. The CDC just wanted us a solid waste material of animal and human material coming down the river from getting into the pipes that were drawn up into the cottages or the boats or et cetera, that become part of intake. have water, which creates on and on and on. Our product, I'm not promoting our product, it's a question, but I just want to just so you have a little bit of that. We diffuse vacuum at the source of sun for electric salinization and bicycle, actually, bicycle in Rwanda, bicycle in Cambodia, and we're also helping water distances protect 100% of our aquatic. So as our water is disappearing, our aquatic life, I'm also working on Sacramento, also working on Colorado, I'm also working. Sorry, I pulled the slide. I pulled to the bottom line is we don't just fix the fish or whatever, we pick food source for fish, whether it's grass shrimp, whatever it might be. We're out there all by ourselves.
What's your question?
My question is, I didn't know you all existed. How do I have enough work organization, students, or the people that are sitting in this room? We're doing this on our own. We penetrated into these countries by ourselves. And is that an area that's being looked at by your, I should say?
So I actually heard two questions. One is, what happens with ecosystems? Like when you thought you put in a bunch of safeguards for them, and you have something like climate change that happens, and it changes those safeguards. Maybe you lose the kind of you have like a rebalancing. So, and the second is how to maybe more generally, like how do you become a part maybe of a broader water and/or adaptation community? Is that right?
Yes, I mean you're kind of organizing or making bad decisions is so incredibly important. You are making decisions. There's more pieces to it than just there's a lot of pieces to the decision. We are a part of it. How do we work? Our organization.
Well, I think the nice thing about feeling insecure in your work is that you usually feel compelled to reach out to other people. So.
And I have been studied by University of Mass and Penn State.
So I think talk. But there's a bunch of people in this room that would be interested in learning more about your work, and probably in the broader mailing list too. I don't know if there's like some other kinds of community building activities that you all might have.
I was going to.
I did.
Good.
Yeah.
So you'll start getting the list, and so a lot of the faces in the room today are familiar. So say that we were here today. Do this every third Thursday, or the third Thursday of every week. And if you would like to sign up about, that would be great.
Actually, we'll come to the live.
I will try to find my mic. So I'm with USAID. So we work in Vietnam and all over the world. I would suggest that for John that you go to allianceforwater.org and sign up.
I get that.
And then I will email you because I would love to talk further. You need to wrap up.
Yeah, my pleasure. I have a bunch of cards up here too. So
Both of you.
No worries. Go ahead.
Andrew has one more question.
No.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So, I mean, not that I know somebody has really.
It's going to snow tomorrow.
Yeah. Funny, I was with somebody from NOAA yesterday, and I knew it was coming, but they weren't. I would talk. You would say, "Oh, yeah, it's going to be 0.7 inches." That's what I see. It's going to start at,
That's right. You also know the answers. Yeah.
Well, we can tell you what it's going to snow in 40 years.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, don't ask me about tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah, we're going to develop a flexible governance mechanism, and it's going to tell us. Yeah.
Here's Couch John will see.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. February will be here somewhere between this floor and the ground floor, and we will let you know. February is valuation of the We know it's being used. We're going to find out in February economic value, how many dollars, US making dollars, we're losing by using the tool. And then in March, we're hoping it'll be a Wilson Center, but it'll be a discussion of how will the outcomes affect USAID. And then people will announce February. We're not positive what that is. Too much for coming. Lots of snow. Everybody wants to put up John. I don't know the sign up sheet. Thank you, and we'll see you in February.
What do you want to pay for?